The first time he saw the child, he froze, as if the world had stopped turning. The boy's eyes were the mirror of his own, a truth so undeniable that it shook every wall he had spent years building. But that moment was not the beginning. It was the consequence of choices made long ago. Choices he thought would protect him from weakness, from love, from the life he never believed he needed. Years earlier, before the silence, before the distance, there had been her. Adrian Wolfe lived in a world where success meant sacrifice. At 35, he was known across the city as a man who never faltered, a billionaire investor who turned struggling businesses into empires. His name was whispered with awe in boardrooms and admired in glossy magazines, but those who stood close enough knew one truth. Adrian had locked his heart behind steel doors. In his eyes, emotions blurred judgment, and family meant distraction. He believed happiness was temporary, but power, that was permanent. Elena Hart was his opposite. She wasn't rich, wasn't powerful, and yet she carried a light that seemed untouchable. At 22, she dreamed of more than just paying rent on her tiny apartment. She wanted to create, to inspire, to leave behind something beautiful in a world too often obsessed with numbers and wealth. By day, she worked as a junior designer, barely keeping up with bills. But by night, she painted canvases alive with color and hope. She didn't measure her worth in money. She measured it in moments, in love, in meaning. Their worlds should never have crossed. But destiny, uninvited and unplanned, has its own way of weaving stories. A single project brought her into Adrian's towering office, an ordinary task that should have ended quickly. Instead, it became the beginning of everything. She challenged him when no one dared, stood her ground when most bent under his sharp words, and in her quiet defiance, something inside him stirred.
She was not intimidated by his power, nor impressed by his wealth.
To him, that was dangerous. To her, it was just honesty. For a while, they built something fragile, hidden between late-night conversations and mornings that felt like promises. But fragility has a way of breaking under fear. One dawn, with sunlight spilling into her small apartment, Adrian made the decision he believed was strength. He walked away. No cruel words, no anger. Only the cold distance of a man convinced that love was a chain. She reached for him with trembling hope, but he closed the door on a future she had already begun to dream of. She did not yet know it, but destiny had already planted a seed, one that would change both their lives forever. The silence after Adrian's departure was heavier than Elena had ever imagined. Days blurred into nights, and her once vibrant apartment seemed colder without the sound of laughter, without the quiet presence that had somehow filled the empty corners of her world. She painted, but the colors looked hollow, her brush refusing to capture what her heart could no longer feel. Friends told her to forget him, to move on, but how could she? He hadn't just walked away from her. He had taken the fragile dream she had started to believe in and shattered it before it could take root. She tried to convince herself that perhaps love wasn't meant for her, that maybe Adrian had been a lesson and not a future. But destiny had other plans. It was a morning like any other, quiet and gray, when the truth arrived. Standing barefoot on the bathroom floor, Elena stared at the test in her trembling hands. 2 faint lines, her breath caught, and her knees gave way beneath her. For a long time she sat motionless, her world tilting between disbelief and fear. She whispered his name, but there was no answer, no warm arms to hold her steady. The man who had sworn he didn't need a family had unknowingly left her with the very thing he feared most, a child, a living reminder of a love he had tried to erase. Tears welled in her eyes, not from regret, but from the overwhelming weight of responsibility. How would she manage? She was young, struggling, barely able to take care of herself. And yet, as her hands touched her stomach, something fierce sparked inside her. She realized this child was not just a burden, it was a gift, a reason to keep fighting, to keep creating, to keep living. She would not crumble under his absence. She would rise, for the tiny heartbeat that would soon depend on her. In that fragile moment, a quiet vow was born. Even if Adrian Wolfe never knew, even if he never returned, Elena would carry this life with strength and courage. What she didn't realize was that destiny had only just begun to weave its story, and the path she feared walking alone would one day bring her face to face with the man who once walked away. And when that day came, nothing would ever be the same again. Months passed, and Elena's life became a quiet battle between exhaustion and hope. Each day brought new challenges, long hours at work, the weight of bills stacking higher, and the uncertainty of a future she hadn't planned. Yet every time fear whispered in her ear, she would place her hand on her growing stomach and feel a strength she never knew she had. Her dreams of opening an art gallery faded into the background, replaced by a single powerful dream, to give her child a life filled with love, even if she had to carry that dream alone. When the baby was born, the world seemed to pause. She held him close, his tiny fingers wrapping instinctively around hers, and in that moment, she knew she had been given something far greater than she had ever lost. She named him Daniel, a name that meant, "God is my judge," for she felt only the heavens could understand the battles she had endured. His eyes, deep and strikingly familiar, made her heart ache with memories of Adrian. But instead of breaking her, they became her fuel. Each glance reminded her why she couldn't give up. Life was not easy. Nights blurred into sleepless hours and days stretched with endless responsibilities. Still, Elena refused to let despair win. She worked tirelessly, taking freelance design projects, painting when Daniel napped, and finding joy in the smallest moments. His laughter, his first smile, the way he looked at her as if she were his entire world. Those moments stitched her broken heart back together, piece by piece. And yet, no matter how strong she became, a quiet part of her still wondered about Adrian. Did he think of her? Did he ever regret the choice he made? She knew she could never go back, could never beg for a place in his world again. But fate has a way of bending lives back toward each other when least expected. One crisp autumn afternoon, as she carried Daniel through a crowded street fair, the air filled with the scent of roasted chestnuts and the sound of laughter, she felt it. A sudden shift in the air, a shadow from the past brushing against her present. She turned, her heart pounding, and for a fleeting second, her eyes locked with the man she had once loved and lost. Adrian Wolfe stood just steps away, his gaze fixed not on her, but on the child in her arms. His breath caught, his carefully built walls beginning to crumble, because staring back at him were his own eyes, reflected in the face of a son he never knew existed. For a moment, the busy world around them faded into silence. Adrian stood frozen, his usual commanding presence shattered by the sight before him. The boy in Elena's arms looked no older than 3, yet carried the unmistakable shadow of his own features, the same eyes, the same curve of the jaw. It was as though destiny had sculpted a mirror just to confront him with the truth he had tried to escape. His chest tightened, his breath uneven. He had spent years mastering control, but in that instant, every deal, every success, every wall he had built meant nothing. He was no longer the untouchable Adrian Wolfe. He was simply a man staring at the life he had unknowingly left behind. Elena's heart pounded as she clutched Daniel closer, torn between running and standing still. She hadn't prepared for this moment, hadn't imagined that fate would place him so suddenly in her path. The crowd pressed around them, laughter and voices filling the air, but her world had narrowed to the man whose eyes searched hers with disbelief and something else, something dangerously close to regret. She braced herself, expecting anger, accusations, denial. Instead, Adrian took a single step forward, his voice low, rough with emotion he hadn't used in years. "Eleanor, is he?" She didn't answer, not with words. The truth was already written in Daniel's face, in the way the boy stared back at Adrian with innocent curiosity. The silence between them was heavier than any conversation could be. Adrian's mind raced through the years he had spent alone, thinking solitude was power, believing distance was strength. Yet here stood the living proof that his choices had not erased the past, only delayed the inevitable. Elena finally found her voice, quiet but steady. "You made it clear what you wanted, Adrian. A life without ties, a life without us." Her words carried no bitterness, only truth, though her eyes shimmered with the pain of remembering. He flinched, realizing the cost of his decision, the weight of a child who had grown without him. But destiny does not give second chances without purpose. For the first time, Adrian felt fear, not of losing money, not of losing power, but of losing the chance to know the boy who bore his name without ever speaking it. In that moment, a door he thought he had closed forever creaked open, leaving him with only one question burning in his soul. Was it too late to step through? Adrian couldn't shake the image of Daniel's eyes staring back at him, haunting him long after that unexpected meeting at the street fair. That night, alone in his penthouse, the city lights spread endlessly beneath him, yet for the first time, he felt small. Deals worth millions sat untouched on his desk. His phone buzzed with urgent calls he ignored. None of it mattered anymore. What mattered was the boy, whose smile carried innocence he had never known, and the woman whose strength had grown in his absence. Adrian had built empires, But now he wondered if he had lost the only kingdom worth ruling, the one of love, family, and belonging. Elena, however, was not ready to let him back into her world so easily. Her heart had been broken once, and she refused to let it shatter again. When Adrian reached out, asking to see her, she hesitated. Trust was fragile, and she knew promises could be broken with a single choice. But when she looked at Daniel, his laughter filling their small apartment, his drawings taped proudly on the wall, she realized the truth. This was not just her story anymore. It was Daniel's too, and he deserved to know the man who had given him life, even if it meant risking her own heart. Their first conversation was tentative, filled with unspoken words and long pauses. Adrian admitted he had been a coward. That fear of weakness had cost him everything. He confessed that in chasing power, he had forgotten what it meant to live. His voice broke when he said, "The moment I saw him, I knew I had been wrong all these years." Elena listened, her eyes searching for sincerity. She wanted to believe him, but memories of the day he left still echoed within her. "Words aren't enough, Adrian," she whispered. "Daniel doesn't need a man who visits out of guilt. He needs someone who will stay, no matter what." Adrian felt the weight of her challenge. For the first time in his life, success wasn't measured in contracts or headlines. It was measured in trust he had to earn, in love he had to rebuild, in a child's heart he had to win. And as he looked at Elena, holding on to the boy who had his eyes, Adrian realized this was the greatest battle he would ever fight, not against rivals or markets, but against the man he used to be. The weeks that followed were a test of patience, courage, and truth. Adrian didn't try to buy his way back into Elena's life with grand gestures or expensive gifts. He knew those things meant nothing to her. Instead, he showed up in the quiet, ordinary moments. He sat with Daniel in the park, teaching him how to fly a kite. He visited Elena's small apartment with bags of groceries, insisting on cooking, even though he barely knew how. He read bedtime stories, his deep voice softening as Daniel leaned against him, slowly trusting the stranger who felt so familiar. Each small act chipped away at the walls Elena had built, proving that he wasn't here for a fleeting moment. He was here to stay. Yet trust is not rebuilt overnight. Elena struggled with doubt, her heart torn between the memory of the man who walked away and the one who now knelt on the floor piecing together Lego castles with their son. She wanted to believe people could change, but fear whispered that he might disappear again. One evening, as Daniel slept peacefully, she finally asked the question that had weighed on her heart for years. "Why now, Adrian? Why only after seeing him?" Adrian's answer came with raw honesty. "Because I didn't know what love was until I lost it. I thought strength meant shutting it out. But the moment I saw Daniel, I understood what true weakness was, living without him, without you." "I can't change the past, Elena, but I can fight for the future if you'll let me." Her eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from the overwhelming power of hope. She had survived on her own, raised Daniel with nothing but courage and determination. Yet as she looked at Adrian, his eyes no longer cold, his walls broken, she saw not the man who abandoned her, but the man who was willing to learn how to love. Destiny had brought them full circle, not to erase the past, but to write a new chapter. A chapter where resilience met redemption, where love wasn't perfect but real, and where a child became the bridge between two broken souls. As Adrian held Elena's hand for the first time in years, he knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning of a life worth living.